You are listening to the Manument Podcast. My name is Casey, and I'm here with my buddy Glenn Johnson, investment advisor and founder of Jabez Financial right here in the Uncasville area. In every episode, he is here to break down today's biggest retirement worries and headlines for us. All right, Glenn, let's get into the good stuff. Americans apparently miss their pensions and the guaranteed income that they provide. Only 13 million people in the U.S. still have a pension right now. Now, a recent survey I read this week by the National Institute of Retirement Security found that 75% of retirees agree with the following statement. The disappearance of traditional pensions has made it harder for workers to achieve the American dream. So I wanted to talk to you about this, Glenn. Is there a way to create a personal pension so that someone can still pursue that American dream?
Yes, there most certainly is a way to make things better. See, first we want to understand the beauty of the pension and the reason why they were so much easier than having to manage a 401k is because back in the day, let's take this back, but even where they came from. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, if someone learned to trade and they could do it better than anybody else, they could have a solid career for 40 years because technology didn't change all that much during one person's working lifetime. Like if they had the ability to rebuild a carburetor, they could do that for 40 years until fuel injection came out. Or if somebody was in the vinyl record business, that would be fine. But then there was cassette tapes and CDs, and now we don't even need those. Right. And because technology changes so fast, how well you can do one thing soon becomes irrelevant. And what matters is how quickly can you learn how to do something new. And when people used to be able just to learn their profession, now people are forced, whether they want to or not, they're forced into not just learning how to perform their trade well, but they're also forced into developing a financial education to take care of their retirement. See, prior to 1974, when ERISA was passed, the Employee Retirement Income Securities Act, companies were accumulating so much money in their pension funds that the companies were being bought and sold not because of their income statement and balance sheet, but because of the amount of assets they had in their pension funds. That's what became more valuable. So the government didn't like that, so they stepped in to help. And a couple years later, in 1978, they wrote the Revenue Act, which gave birth to tax code section 401k, 403b, and the rest of them. And big government approached big business and says, okay, well, right now, you're putting aside 100% of the money for people. And the companies were assuming 100% of the risk, investment risk, and they were 100% liable to give people a check the rest of their life. So when the government approaches them and say, well, how about instead of you putting in 100%, you only put in half of the money? If you put in $1, the employee puts in $1. Mm-hmm. They say, all right, keep talking. All right, well, how about all of the investment risk is now on your employee and it's off your shoulders? They say, well, does it get any better than that? Right? And so then they can turn around to the new potential hirees and say, we have this fantastic 401k program, whereas if you put in $1, we'll match it. And although that's better than not having any pension at all, it pales in comparison to what those pensions used to provide because it's forced people into developing their own financial education in addition to learning what they have to do for a career. So when mapping out a retirement strategy of income that's going to last the rest of your life, which is what the pension does. It provides guaranteed income. And with the pension, there's no investment knowledge necessary. But now that we've got 401ks, we have to take the same mindset as a pension fund manager and not a day trader. So for the last secular bull run we had was from 1982 to 2000, to the peak of the dot-com bubble. And that's when, during the 90s, that's when most of the mutual funds were birthed. And everyone and their brother thought they were a brilliant day trader because nothing went down. Everything was doing great. But they didn't have the mindset of a pension fund manager. So when the dot-com bubble burst, that's when people lost their whole retirement savings.
Well, and you mentioned people have to create their own financial education with 401ks, which I know so many young people who were not educated. If I didn't have my parents when I started in the working world to guide me through that, I would have probably opted out. Why would I want to give some of my money away? I want my money and I want it now. And I feel like a lot of the younger generation isn't fully educated on the 401k and what it can do for them. So they opt out and they're missing out on free money, Glenn.
Right. And that's where when people started out with pensions, the idea was get a good education, get a good job with a solid company that has good benefits and a good pension. And based upon your efforts, the company was putting aside money on your behalf for your future. So younger people that weren't as mature were still having money set aside for them.
Right.
And then we've handed that financial responsibility now to people that aren't as financially mature, so they don't know better. They don't know to keep stuffing that money aside from the day they start working. And I worked with Dave Ramsey for in his organization for a year or so a while back, and he talks about how if you start saving 12 to 15% of all you earn from the day you start working, by the time you reach retirement age, you'll be fine. And that is completely true. Mm-hmm. And that's the way pensions used to work. Right. Now, that still works today with a 401k as long as nothing bad happens in life.
And we cannot bank on that, Glenn. Well, I want to kind of look at this from an even broader scope. Do you think the disappearance of pensions has kind of shifted how people define the American dream overall? I mean, for your clients, are you finding that American dream is still about comfort in retirement, or has that idea evolved?
Well, people used to not be retired for all that long. Like
right.
when Social Security first came about, the government was only planning on people being retired for a couple of years before they passed away. So, in fact, the word retirement isn't even in the Bible. We're supposed to be productive our whole life. Mm-hmm. But there reaches a point of financial independence. So once we become financially independent, now we don't have to think about money. And that's the beauty of what pensions were providing. An income that you didn't have to think about. Because who wants to spend all that time thinking about something that doesn't love you back? This is where if we can solve the financial problem, solve the cash flow problem for the rest of our lives, now we can be in a position where we can spend more of our time thinking about the people that we love and the things we want to accomplish and the dreams that God planted in our hearts.
Absolutely. Well, if you are missing the security of a traditional pension, know that you're not alone, but also know that you're not out of options. Glenn and the team at Jabez Financial can show you how to build your own personal pension plan, one that's going to fit your lifestyle and your retirement goals. We are standing by right now to take your call. 860-288-9977 is how you reach us. And we have got 5 spots available for that complimentary introductory conversation with Glenn. That number to reach us again, 860-288-9977. One more time, 860-288-9977. Or you can always head to jabezfinancial.com and get connected with us there. We've got more retirement tips and conversations ahead right after the break. All right, Glenn, I want to talk about Warren Buffett for a moment. He is a multi-billionaire, so what he does with his own money may not apply to most of us, but as a part of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren has been decreasing his risk in stocks and now holds over $344 billion in cash and equivalents. So talk to us about this, Glenn. If Warren Buffett is de-risking his portfolio, should we be thinking about doing the same?
It most certainly is something to consider when we look at somebody with the kind of financial wisdom that he has, especially when it comes to the markets. It's something to be very mindful of. Warren Buffett's talked a number of times about how he really doesn't like being in cash. It's wasted. It's almost like money that isn't put to work. So when he has hundreds of billions of dollars sitting in cash, we have to ask ourselves why. Mm-hmm. And isn't it interesting when we look at the balances in our 401k and our IRAs, if we look at the amount of dollars we have invested in the market right now, while people like Warren Buffett have been moving into cash, what's that telling us? See, there is a time to buy, there's a time to hold, and there's a time to sell. And Warren Buffett buys companies for the long run. If you look at the holdings in his portfolio, a lot of those companies he's owned for a long time. He bought them right when it was an ideal time to buy them, and he's kept them. He's very much a buy and hold strategist because he can afford to be too. But what we have to look at is it the right time to be moving into equities? And when we look at that, there's something he came up with called the Buffett indicator, which is the value of the stock market over the GDP. So take the Wilshire 5000, which is basically the stock market, the overall view of the stock market. And what is the value of stocks over the GDP? And a healthy spot really is around 70%. And although many companies are investing internationally, like domestically based companies, they're investing internationally, we can bring up that percentage a bit to maybe 100%. But when you look at the value of the companies over the GDP, we're at a point now where it's over 200%. The market's way overpriced. In fact, if you take the Magnificent Seven and you pulled them out of the market, how strong would the economy actually be doing? If you take the Magnificent Seven, make up something like over a third of the S&P 500. In fact, they make up almost 29% of the entire equities market between the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ put together. That's thousands and thousands of companies compared to just 7 companies. So we've got a huge discrepancy between in the market, the rich getting richer and the poor staying poor. And that's the very definition of an unhealthy market. So when Warren Buffett has so much money so much of his assets sitting in cash, that's because he's really waiting on the sidelines for there to be a good time to get back in. And that's what knowing that we're in such a bubble, it's something that maybe let's just not lose right now.
Yeah, well, I think it's always interesting to see what the world's most famous investors are doing. So when somebody like Warren Buffett shifts a big chunk of his portfolio into cash, it really makes you wonder, like you said, Glenn, what does he see that maybe we don't? So could you talk to us a little bit more about that with this move towards cash? What kind of signals do you think Warren is picking up on, and how should we at home interpret that for our own retirement strategies?
Well, when we look at the price per earnings ratio across the S&P 500, for example, we're at like 38 to 1. And what that means is people are paying $38 to buy a stock that pays a $1 dividend. The relationship between what people are willing to pay and how much the company is earning, it's out of balance. It's way out of whack. And that continues to increase as the Fed produces more money, as they keep printing more money. And it continues to increase with over-enthusiasm about where the market's headed. See, there's 2 parts. The market can do well while the mechanics of the economy are lousy. At the same time, the mechanics and the fundamentals of the economy can be improving while the stock market declines. So if we look at from 2009, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, during that time, the mechanics of the economy were not good at all. Yet the stock market was kept climbing and climbing and climbing due to federal stimulus. And then it reaches a point where it's, like I said, it's been climbing since 2009. Now we've got this bubble of massive stimulus, and even after COVID, when the government started mailing people checks, that just threw gas on the fire. So the Fed has created this massive bubble and overpriced the market. There has to be some kind of correction or recession so that we can weed out those zombie companies and get back to a healthier economy. Now, there are some good things happening, whether it's foreign investment into the United States or increase in revenue that the federal government has through tariffs. There are some good things that are happening in the economy, but the market still has to correct. See, these are the kinds of conversations I have when clients come into the office, because it's important to me, and it should be important to everybody really, that you thoroughly understand why you have the investments you have, why you're positioned the way you are, given the overall direction of the market and the economy, and make sure that your positioning aligns with what you're looking to accomplish. So I invite you to give us a call at 860-288-9228. 9977 and pick a time to come in for a conversation. I'd love to hear your story and find out what your goals and what your objectives and what your dreams are for retirement so that you can be properly positioned to make sure they happen and not just leave it to speculation and a hope for the best. There's things you can do to be positioned properly that you can win no matter what. And let's have a conversation and find out what those things are. And so you can really look forward to what you have coming down the road.
Yes, you do not want to miss out on this opportunity that Glenn is offering you today. And I want to emphasize there is no commitment. There is no obligation. This is just a conversation, but spots will fill up. So go ahead and dial 860-288-9977 and we will find a convenient spot on the calendar for you to sit down with Glenn and get those questions answered. 860-288-9977 is that number one more time. Or, of course, you can connect with us online anytime. We are at jabezfinancial.com, and that's Jabez, J-A-B, easy. You are listening to The Manument Show. My name is Casey. I am here with my buddy, investment advisor Glenn Johnson. And Glenn, we've got to talk a little taxes. So for those of you listening, how do you plan for taxes? Are you of the April 15th frame of mind, or does it go beyond that? Well, here we've got wealth manager Jeffrey Levine on the Decoding Retirement podcast recently. Take a listen.
Another common mistake I see individuals make is focusing too much on their annual taxes and their annual tax bill and not enough on what I call their lifetime tax bill. When it comes to good tax planning, it's not about giving anybody the lowest tax bill in any one year. It's looking at their lifetime and trying to figure out how to pay taxes over that extended period of time such that the total of those taxes over your life is as low as possible.
So, Glenn, I wanted to ask you, does this match your view of tax bracket management? Can you talk to us about this a little bit? Maybe give us an example.
It most certainly does. See, nobody likes paying taxes. Nobody likes you paying taxes except the government. They're happy to have you pay taxes. And you're going to pay them. You're either going to pay them now, pay them later, but either way, you're going to pay. So when we accept the fact that this bill is coming no matter what, now it's just a matter of developing a strategic plan to go about it the right way to keep that to a minimum. And it's like anything else. You have to know what you're up against. And when we know what we're up against, we have to learn the rules of the game. And you can't win if you don't know you can't play if you don't know the rules, and you can't, never mind, win. And so This is where we have to look at from when he's talking about what's your lifetime tax bill. This is where we want to go and take a strategic approach to it, where in some cases, like I've got some clients, traditional IRAs are far better than Roths because when they walk into retirement, they don't have a taxable income, so that when they're pulling money out of their traditional IRAs, they're pulling it out tax-free and they never had to pay tax on it. So sometimes traditional IRAs are better. Roth IRAs are a really tough one to beat because all that growth is tax-free. So maybe there's a time between retirement and when you're forced to start taking required minimum distributions. Usually there's a good window of time there to be doing Roth conversions. So if we're using traditional IRAs while we're working, and then strategically do some Roth conversions after retirement and before our RMDs start, that's a good time because that minimizes what our required minimum distributions will be. Now, that's not right for everybody. Some people, if they can have a Roth, they should stick with them 100%. This is where every situation is completely different. But I find sometimes when I sit down with somebody and they just retired last year, and I talk to them about voluntarily assuming a big tax bill by maxing out their tax bracket, by doing some Roth conversions, they may look at me funny initially, like, what are you talking about? I'm going to get this. You want me to pay taxes on this now? Yes. It's because it will save you a tremendous amount of tax dollars later, especially when you're in a position where you're taking more money than you need to. Like if your RMDs, if you look at when you're 73 or 74 or 70, whenever you start taking your required minimum distributions, if you know that's going to be more than you need, you may want to consider doing some Roth conversions before then, So it will reduce your required minimum distribution.
Well, a lot of factors to consider. And like you just said, every single situation is different. And that's why it's so important to incorporate the help of a professional to give you that second set of eyes, look at your situation and figure out what the best path forward for you is going to be. And, Glenn, I'm thinking that sometimes people, they think they got all the bases covered if they're just filing on time and they're keeping good records. They think that they're set, on the tax front, but real surprises can sneak up when we aren't paying attention to how our income is getting taxed year after year. So I want to see if you've seen this, Glenn. Have you ever heard of somebody who suddenly owed way more money than they expected because they weren't paying attention to their tax bracket? Can you talk to us about how missing those little details can turn into a real eye-opener for somebody by the time they reach retirement?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I remember I had a client once and he really dodged a bullet. This man he was never married and he had no kids. And then I met with him just after he retired. And I asked him about taking a look at his tax return. He goes, I haven't filed taxes in 15 years.
Oh, my goodness.
I said, you haven't even filed?
He's scared,
like,
Glenn.
No. He's like, I don't pay any attention to that. Well, fortunately for his benefit, I referred him to my CPA. He had gone through and filed almost 15 years of tax returns, and he walked away without a single penalty at all.
How did that happen?
Yes, but as it turns out, he had enough money withheld from his paycheck all those years to cover his tax liability. So it worked out with no problems.
Goodness.
Now, that's miraculous. A lot of times what we find is the people that haven't paid attention to it, their story is entirely different. And it can be an absolute nightmare. And they can find themselves with a 6-figure tax bill that it's just devastating to their retirement. And they think, well, how did this happen? How did this happen? Well, here's the point. How it happened is the income that you have, like I said, with every blessing comes a burden. When you have income, there is the obligation that you have legally to make sure the appropriate amount of taxes get paid. Nobody's a fan of paying taxes. But if we're smart about it and we know what's coming, we know what to avoid. It's not the big things that trip you up. It's not the big things that trip you up because you see them coming. And it's the little things. It's like, this little tax bill over here I didn't pay attention to, or maybe I didn't have enough withheld from this over here. Well, all those things add up, and then they can turn into a giant tax monster that can eat you alive. So this is where we want to get ahead of the game. Know that with proper tax planning, it can take a lot of the sting out of it, as long as we stay ahead of it.
No, I'm so glad it worked out for your client because you started telling that story, Glenn. My eyes got so big. It was the beginning of a very scary story. So I'm so glad it worked out for him. But I want to remind folks that he's probably the exception. He's not the rule. You don't want to roll the dice like that. So if you're listening, if you're worried about how your retirement income is going to affect your tax situation, I want to encourage you to sit down with Glenn. 860-288-9977 is how to reach us. And I just want to remind you that our first 5 callers today will receive an introductory conversation completely complimentary. That number again is 860-288-9977. And we are standing by now at the office to take your call. So don't delay. Dial 860-288-9977 and we will find the next convenient time on the calendar for you. Or of course, you can always visit us online. We are at jabezfinancial.com and we can get connected that way. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Manument Podcast. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your favorite podcasts so that you never miss an episode. And we will see you next time. Take care.
Investment advisory services offered through Jabez Financial, LLC, a registered investment advisor firm. Registration is not an endorsement by securities regulators. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance products, including annuities, offered through Glenn Johnson, Connecticut Insurance, license number 4628409. The firms are separate entities. Annuity guarantees rely on the financial strength and claims-paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are not offered by Jabez Financial, LLC. Read your contract for restrictions, limitations, or penalties. Jabez Financial, LLC is not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if Jabez Financial, LLC is licensed in your state, please call 860-390-0093.